Hi, Brittany.
Hi, Rachel. How are you doing?
Doing good. How are you?
Wonderful. Thank you.
So, Brittany, have you ever played a game with someone where they change the rules in the middle of the game or they make the rules up as they go along?
I think I used to do that as a kid and nobody wanted to play with me.
I have a son that likes to do that. He's kind of notorious in our family for changing the rules. He doesn't do that so much anymore because, like you said, nobody wanted to play with him for a while. But now that he's learned to accept the rules are the rules and this is how we play and this is the challenge and this is how we get along, it's a lot more fun for everybody. But when you're a kid and you've got somebody that changes the rules to benefit them, it can be really frustrating and chaotic and, and sometimes in life, the justice system can feel that way a little bit. So today I want to talk about the rule of law versus the rule of men and what that means. So basically, the Constitution is like the rule book for the entire country, for the entire government. It's a framework of rules that we're all supposed to live by and that the government is supposed to stick to. But when people ignore it, when people break the rules and there's no punishment, there's no check, then it's kind of like your sibling or my son changing the rules in the middle of the game and just bringing chaos and ruining everyone's fun.
Yeah, because you don't know what to do. You don't know if you're breaking a rule or breaking a law. And if it's a government who can put you in jail or something, you should know what it is, where the line is.
So the way our government is set up, it's supposed to be set up so that it's hard, not impossible, but it's hard for men to skirt the Constitution and make up the rules as they go along. And one way that we do that is there's divided government. The government is divided into three branches. The executive, which is like the president and all of the agencies that he heads up.
Like FDA, EPA, all those are under the executive.
Executive, yeah. And then there's the judicial branch, which is the courts.
It's my favorite.
They interpret the law. And then the legislative branch makes the law. So the legislative branch makes the law. That's Congress and the Senate. And then the executive enforces the law, and the judicial branch interprets the law. So there's these three branches of government that have their roles within the Constitution and kind of keep everything humming. And those three branches have what we call checks and balances. They're all a check on each other. In other words, the judicial branch has things that it can do to check the president or check Congress. Congress has things that they can do to check the executive and check the judicial. And then the president has things that he can do to keep the other two branches in check. So checks
just to
and balance.
Oh, go on.
No,
I was
going
going
to
give. Yeah, I was going to give just an example to put it in perspective. So let's say Congress passes a law, and people are like, "Oh, this is unconstitutional. We don't like this." And maybe the president agrees, and he vetoes the law. He can say, "No, I don't like it."
Yeah.
But then they can go to the court and fight it out. So it's like there's all these different they each play like a referee to each other. Of if any two of them disagree, they can kind of, it's like a tiebreaker in a way. And so it works out. That's how you get these Supreme Court cases. This is how you get vetoes. This is how you get all sorts of different ways that these checks and balances play out.
Yes. And also in the Constitution, we have spelled out individual rights. The Bill of Rights says things that the government can't do against individual American citizens. Like freedom of speech, freedom of religion. You can't encroach upon those things, right to bear arms, those kinds of things. And then further, getting back to kind of checks and balances and divided government, we have two political parties. And when those two parties are kind of opposing each other, that's kind of another form of a check and balance. They kind of oppose each other and keep each other in line.
I think is almost a way, right? It shouldn't be easy to pass new laws. You should kind of have to discuss it and debate it.
It should be such a good law that both sides can agree that this needs to happen. And when you've got, say, one political party in charge of all of the government, you're not probably going to get the same checks and balances that you should get when the founders envisioned the framing of our government. So,
which is why I sometimes kind of like, even if I agree with one more than the other on certain issues, sometimes I like when there is that division. Sometimes one party has the House, one party has the Senate. And so there's like this back and forth. I think there should be back and forth. I like the back and forth. I think the back and forth is how we keep things in check, as you said.
Yeah. And like to some extent, do we really need another law? Do we really? So
probably not.
That gridlock that can be a good thing.
Yeah.
Or like the government shutdown is like, maybe we could save a few dollars, just not have park services for a few days. That's typically what they shut down because everything else is
And then there's always
kind of
one person who goes and cleans up of their own will. And I always love those stories, but I digress. So back on track. Sorry.
So what happens if people just all of a sudden one day decided to ignore the Constitution? Like everybody in the government all at once decided to just ignore the Constitution. We don't care about it anymore. Can you imagine what would happen? They don't care about freedom of speech. They don't care about the Bill of Rights anymore. They're just going to ignore it.
It feels like that kind of happened during the War on Terror. The War on Terror. And I remember coming of age. I was 16 when 9/11 happened. And the post 9/11 world, I'm not saying it's not still like government takes away rights, but there was a period of time from 9/11 to the Edward Snowden revelations where it felt like we really didn't have any rights anymore because all anyone had to do in the government was to say that it was a matter of national security or terrorism. Yeah. And that justified even presidents attacking you with drones, American citizens. So I feel like the closest in my lifetime that we've gotten to that state that you're talking about happened in that period of time, that like 15 years, where there was a lot of time where it was like, do we even have free speech anymore? Do we even have this? So that was an interesting little experiment. I didn't love it. So.
Yeah. And the lockdowns too really bothered me from a constitutional
Oh my goodness. Of course, the lockdowns. I think I blocked it out.
Who could blame you? We're all suffering PTSD. But I mean, even freedom of speech. Now, say Facebook censorship, Twitter censorship. They were censoring what people could say and, whether they could protest the mandates that were put upon us all.
Which now we know weren't just the private companies. It was the government pressuring all these companies.
That's what a lot of people would say. Well, it's Facebook. They don't have to allow you to say whatever they don't want you to say because it's a private company and they're not the government and they don't have a Bill of Rights. They're not subject to that because they're a private actor. They're not the government. But then you find out that behind the scenes, Congress and the administration, the president's people had a direct line to the higher ups at Facebook and were pressuring them. And I know that congressmen were doing the same thing with books on Amazon. There were books that Adam Schiff personally wrote like public letters. He did this out in the open. He wrote open letters to Amazon. You can't sell this book, and then people. I don't know how he got away with that because, if that's not a violation of the First Amendment, what is?
It's interesting how we saw that change from, during the War on Terror era, it was very much a government thing. And then the lines blurred because rule of law, we think of Constitution, government. And then it was like, okay, but Constitution, private company like Twitter and Facebook. And it was almost kind of sneaky. on the part,
Yeah.
not almost, it was sneaky on the part of government because they were behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And they're supposed to adhere to the Constitution, but they were using, threats and strong arming these private companies. So it's interesting how they got really creative with how to break the rule of law.
Yeah. Yeah. So we've talked about the rule of law, the rule of men, instead of following the Constitution and the laws, it really comes down to the whim of whoever is in power, like the Biden administration. Whoever is pulling the strings in the Biden administration, they get to decide what the rules are, and they're not going to tell you until they've decided that you've broken them.
Which is the whole reason we fought a revolution, because the king believed in the divine right of kings. He thought, no, God granted me the authority to be king. I can make up my rules whenever I please. Yeah, as I go along.
Yeah. So we've seen a lot of examples in recent American history, very recent, of the rule of law kind of disintegrating into the rule of men. And it's very disturbing. There's the way things are supposed to work, and then there's the way they actually do. So, and I think that's what
it's the way the world works, Rachel.
Yeah, this podcast touches on a lot of those themes, the way it should work and the way it actually does work. Sadly, it's not always the same thing.
No.
So, and that's what I wanted to discuss today is the difference and ways that we see creeping, like the rule of law creeping into the rule of man, and how chaotic it can make life and unfair. Just like if you were making up the rules to a game as you were going along. It's not very fun.
No. And I think sometimes, and this is where I have to check myself often, it's where it's like, oh, look at that team meaning, anyone you disagree with in politics. Look at that team. They're breaking the rule of law, and it's for their own reasons. They're bad. Wait, but this guy's breaking rule of law, but I kind of like why he's breaking the rule of law. So it's okay.
Yeah.
And so I think it's very important to not get caught up in that. And I'm not saying that talking down to anybody. I'm saying that almost to myself because I know that I've done that from time to time. The rule of law is so great because it's unmoving. It is what it is. Every rule is written right there. We know what is expected of us. If we start saying that it's okay for some people who we agree with and not other people, then we're no better than the kings making, laws on the whim or at their own whim. So I think it's important not only for us to hold our politicians accountable to the rule of law, but also to remind ourselves when maybe we're playing that partisan card, that party card, or whatever maybe it's not party. Maybe it's just like there's one politician we agree with and we're okay with him doing it, things like that. So it's really important to make sure we're not guilty of what we're trying to avoid.
Yeah. So, I think we'll leave it there.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. This is a really important topic, and it's one that is never going to get old. Doesn't matter who's in office. Doesn't matter what. That's always going to be the eternal struggle, rule of law, rule of man. Yeah. So,
I mean, all the way back through history, it's interesting to see the human struggle of this exact issue. It's a theme that repeats itself over and over every time, place, and culture. Yep. So, so good talk.
Great episode. Let us know what you guys think, please. Again, we love to hear your feedback and suggestions, or if you want us to dig a little deeper into something we talked about, please let us know. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the podcast and share it with your friends. And until next time, Rachel, we will talk to you later.
Talk to you later. Bye-bye.